I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we're gonna revisit a project I did recently where I want to dye some yarn and dye one half of the yarn with one color, flip it over, and then dye the other half with a second color. Now, I did this recently and we got really gorgeous greens and teals in our yarn. The yarn ended up being fantastic, but my colors all went through the yarn more than I really anticipated. And maybe it's because I started with 16 cups of water in the pan. It wasn't particularly low immersion, and so that allowed the colors to like move through and spread. Even though I know the blue is a spreader, so I knew that was going to spread. So today I want to try this again, but I want to set up two different dye baths. One where we're going to start with a really low volume of water, and then one where we're going to start with a higher volume of water and just see what differences we get, if any. Now, I'm planning on using the same colors that I did last time, just so that way I have something else to compare it to for, I guess, consistency's sake. And I plan to add the same amount of acid to each pan, so that way we have like consistency there as well. Before we move forward and start getting everything ready, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Cindy. Cindy, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. The yarn we're going to use today is Knit Picks Swish DK yarn. This yarn is 100% superwash merino wool, and as I said, it is DK weight. And I'm going to add some zip ties onto it so we can pre-soak it. Now, one of the other issues with this particular technique and getting the colors on and maybe having them not go through completely, or maybe they will go through completely. I think that I'm fine with both ways. But the other thing I did last time was I added our dyes to a really large volume of water, and the reason why I did that was that I wanted to be able to spread the dyes out all over the yarn as much as I could. And so there's always a balancing act, but it's just amusing to me that there are times when I'll dye yarn and I'll flip the yarn over and see a lot of white left, and then that isn't what happened as much last time, which again, it's fine because sometimes things may not turn out as I think they might, which means that we don't necessarily have as dramatic a yarn. Maybe it means things are a little more subtle and tonal, but that doesn't mean that the yarn is any less beautiful. And so if we end up with a tonal green that I think we're going to end up with, I'm totally fine with that. I think that that's beautiful. But I'm going to finish filling this up now. As far as yarns go, Swish DK is one that is pretty absorbent, and so wouldn't necessarily need a super long pre-soak given what the goal is today, but for consistency and comparison that I plan to do, let's go ahead and let it pre-soak at least 30 minutes. And it's currently in plain tap water with no acid. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves so I could start measuring out our dyes. I already mentioned we're going to be using blue and yellow today. Specifically, we're using Dharma acid dyes in Brilliant Yellow and Caribbean Blue. These are both primary colors, and I picked them because they have a lot of contrast from one another. And so how much one color goes through the yarn, we'll see really easily. One tiny editor's note is that the respirator mask that I have been using for years, that model isn't available anymore, and so I will, when it's time for me to replace the filters with the last that I have, I'll be getting a new mask, and I will, I guess, update my picture when I have the new one. I weighed out 1 gram of each color twice, and then dissolved the dye in hot tap water, not worrying about the total volume of our mixture yet, because when I'm ready to go add all this dye onto our yarn, then I'll bring up the volume to 1 liter. But I only have one 1 liter measuring cup, and so we'll use that as needed to increase the volume. Instead of measuring out the dyes separately for each batch, you could also go ahead and make a dye stock, but I'm weighing out each dye directly because it's easy to, I guess, consistently measure at 1 gram, and then I don't have to go through all the effort of making the dye stock. I'm gonna try so hard to do this without bumping things. But actually, I'm gonna start heating things up. In this pan, the pan on the left, I have 8 cups of water. And then in this pan, the pan on the right, I have 24 cups of water. Now, when I go ahead and add our dye in 1 liter of water, a liter of water is about 4 cups. So that's gonna have a bigger impact here than it will over there. Ooh, I have an idea of how I'm gonna deal with that. I'll add some acid in with our dyes, so that way I don't change the pH. All right, so into this container, I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And in this one, I'm gonna add 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now, one other variable that is a real variable is the heat. And this is gonna heat up faster than that. And so I wanna keep that in mind as well. But things aren't that hot yet. It just means I'm gonna wanna give everything time to heat up, which means that we may lose water volume while that's happening, but that is okay. Now, my intent is to put the yarn in such a way so that way we have, if we have the circular skein, it's a circle kind of going this way versus that way. So that way we have like half of the yarn just on top. But you can see over here, our yarn is really floating. This is like a very high immersion situation. When we pour that dye in, it's gonna move. It's gonna move, it's not gonna stay put. Whereas on our other side, I could have started with even less than 8 cups of water, but one thing I really wanted to do was for things to be hot when I first added the dye, and that's just going to be a lot harder to achieve if I had less water in here to start with. So we're adding our yarn in, and so we still have with 8 cups like a really comfortable volume of water here. It's just this time our yarn is very, very much at the surface, and it is more compressed because there's just less volume in here. Okay, and again, we may lose more water volume here. I have the heat here on way lower than I do over here at the moment. And compared to the last time I did this, I have less water here and more water here. So I sort of went more extreme on either end. But let me go ahead and wait 15 minutes and then I'll see where we are heat-wise. And in the meantime, I am gonna start preparing our yellow dye, but I don't really wanna move the camera. And I'll just show you in the liter of water, which has some water in it already, I'm gonna add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, the 1 gram of dye, and then I'll fill this up all the way. And so that way we know we're not gonna be changing our pH that we have in our container. Okay, both are warm. I'm at the point where I'm gonna turn up the heat on our low pan, reduce it a bit on the high. Oh man, and we're ready with our first one. I mean, I can't do them simultaneously or anything. I have our 1 gram of dye in 1 liter, and I'm gonna take this and I'm pouring it on. The goal is to spread it all over as much as I can. You know, there's some spots where it didn't go, and that is fine. I'm gonna go reset a tablespoon of vinegar and all of our dye. And the nice thing at this stage is if there were undissolved dye in the cup, I can rinse it really well as I fill it with water. Okay, now I'm gonna try to do the same thing over here. But you can see already as I'm trying to pour and distribute. What's funny is that I got a lot less on top because as I was pouring, rather than hitting the top of the yarn and spreading over the surface, like we got a little bit over here, the liquid just went down to the bottom. So I think we might end up with a lot more yellow on the bottom here than we have on the top, which I find a little bit hilarious. All right, let's set a timer for 20 minutes and then we'll come back and see how things look there. I mean, things look very, very different right now. It's a completely different experience pouring the dye on this way, but I'm having so much fun. And it's okay for them to be different. Like I'm doing my best. Like maybe I poured heavier here, and that's fine. It's all about the vibes of it, right? As we're waiting, I'm prepping the Caribbean blue dye for the other side. And that is a dye that clumps when you're dissolving it. But if you leave the dye, the clumps of dye in water for a little bit of time, it will dissolve. And so there was no clumps left on the spoon when I went to go ahead and rinse it and start making that liter of blue dye. So that's good. And in the like 2 minutes, I'm seeing more soft yellow everywhere here. It just occurred to me that things may be different from the way I thought they might be in my head. And I am so unbelievably excited by that. Oh man. Just because, you know, I'm like, oh, I expect like more coverage of the color here, which still may happen. But yeah, I'm excited. It's been 20 minutes. Let's see how we're doing. The water is looking pretty clear on both, which is ideal. I'm like, that's what we want. That's what we're going for. Okay. Now I'm gonna flip the yarn and woohoo! Okay, we have a little bit of white on this side. Not a ton, but the color did not go all the way through. Now I did pick colors where, you know, there's a lot of movement, but if I was dyeing a variegated colorway with multiple different colors and flipped and saw the white, I'd want to add more color. And so the point is that we're adding different colors on both sides. Now this one, I see very little white. The coverage color, there is still some, but the coverage is overall more even than what we got on the first one. Although, which is ironic because at first, like it looked very white. We have more white on the original side, I think, than we do with the flip because there's so much water in here that when I poured the dye on, this one has a lot more white left in it. When I poured the dyes on, there was a lot of space for things to go, and here there wasn't as much space. Okay, this time I'm gonna bring our blue over here first because I think we'll see more of a change over time. The problem is that it's hard, this like handedness is harder for me to do the pouring. And that's when I'm struggling because since I'm right-handed, like I should pour with the left, but thankfully I did not spill any of that dye. Oh, it looks so pretty though. Oh my gosh. All right, I'm starting my next one. Oh, I need to add the acid. We're now coming over to our other pan and see, because being able to stand over here, I'm finding it way easier to pour, trying to distribute the color as much as I can over everything. There we go. Now, one thing that is so hard for me right now, it's hard enough that I made a whole emote for this, is I want to take my spoon and like poke some of these areas of yellow so badly, especially these ones down here near the bottom where there's like just a little bit at the edge poking up, and I'm going to do my best to not do that, which mainly because I'm just trying to show the difference of the same technique using a lot of water and not a lot of water. And this is a circumstance where we're adding our dyes in the exact same amount of volume. But now what we have here is we have 32 cups of water over here, and we have 16 cups of water there. So by adding the colors, we had a bigger change in the amount here. We increased the volume 100% versus over here we increased it 33%. Is that what makes sense? Because it started, we added, oh my gosh. We added 8 cups of water to both. We started with 24 here and 8 there. And so it made like a bigger proportional impact. Oh, there's a spot up there that I really want to tap, but I'm not. I'm trying really, really hard. And what's really funny is that right now, the difference between the two pans is a subtle difference, but feels very dramatic in that we're not really that low immersion, but the colors can't move that far. However, Caribbean blue is a color that spreads. And so these little hints of yellow that I'm adoring may not still be there when we wait 30 minutes and then come back. So that's something to just keep in mind, but oh, it's so fun. And I think it would be easier if I'm going to do this again. I will try to do this in a colorway that'll be more variegated overall, because if I'm trying to apply a color to just a third of the pan, that is pretty easy to do. It's when I'm trying to slowly distribute a liter of water all over, that is more hard. It's a lot easier to have about a cup and try to, like, whichever way I'm facing, to spread that over an area. And so I have a feeling that that might be the way I play around with something like this going forward. But either way, whether we have a little bit more contrast in between both the depth of the color and also with our hues, and whether this one is a little bit more even, but we still have areas of blue and yellow, both are really, really gorgeous. And so yeah, there's a lot of times with my techniques where I will say the volume of water isn't that important, but it can make a really big difference. And so sometimes it may matter. And anyway, I'm gonna set a timer for 30 minutes. I'll check in a little bit like while we wait, but otherwise I'll see you when the timer goes off. I'm trying so hard to not touch anything. It's been 30 minutes and I am really happy. I am gonna turn off the heat on all 4 burners now. If I didn't say before, I have these full-size 4-inch deep catering steam pans on my gas stove, and so the burners are on. I had started to say earlier that things don't always turn out. I had someone at my door. All right, I don't remember what I was saying, but let's remove our yarn. And you know what? This one is, ooh, delightful. We've got beautiful variation in here too. Dare I say it? We almost have what looks like glazing from Caribbean blue. What? But you can see we've got areas that are more yellow, more green, more blue. This is super pretty. Super, super pretty. I think that it's just everything is going to be way more blended here. And over there, you can already see there are areas that are definitely more yellow and blue and everything. Now, one other thing I didn't mention, this pan started out stained. That should not affect the yarn. There may be a little staining from some of the zip ties because of the blue that I used, but I'm not worried about that because I knew I was going to be adding blue. So therefore, I was not concerned. Now, interesting, we may have more blue in the big dye bath than this one. This one we have more like distinct yellow showing through. And there's areas that are more distinct blue. Oh, it's so pretty. It's a very, very subtle difference, but it's all just because we didn't have that much space for the dyes to go. The yarn was able to act as more of a resist, whereas in the other pan it was floating so much that would have been more challenging. But anyway, I could have left the yarn in here to cool. We probably would have absorbed more of the blue. This is the first time where I'm seeing what looks like there's more blue in this one. Maybe the amount of blue that stays behind is concentration dependent, because since this has more volume, if there's more blue dye per volume of water, then it could look darker. But maybe something else is going on that I don't know. So that's something to investigate a different day. But for now, we have our yarn, we have our low volume and high volume here. And I have not labeled the zip ties, which maybe is gonna be bad, but I think that you guys can feel that we just have more variation here. And I really did try to add things as similarly as I can, but there have been times where the volume doesn't make a huge difference and I can reuse the same dye bath over and over and get similar results. But then there have been times where I've done the same technique, and especially one where I'm wanting the dyes to spread out, the volume of water you have can make a huge difference. And so that is just fun. But I'll see you in a little bit so we can wash our yarn. Let's wash the larger volume water yarn first. Okay, put it in and we'll start adding some water. And I'm gonna add a little bit of dish soap. Now with that extra blue we had in here, I did use the leftover dye bath and soaked up a little bit of that color to prep a yarn mop for a different video. So if you were curious about what happened with that, but it gave like a very light blue color. I am seeing a little bit of color come out, but given that we have total 2 grams of dye on 300 grams of yarn, I'm not expecting the bleeding to be super bad, but it's just when you remove yarn and there's still color in the water, sometimes a little bit of color will come out, and I'm not seeing any more bleeding, which is phenomenal. And we have beautiful coloration in here. I mean, this yarn is gorgeous and subtle and just really, really fantastic on its own, which always feels really, really great to say, because I mean, I love it and I'm happy about that because we did get a difference, but it's always good when you like both. Okay, I'm now bringing over our other yarn, and we have more contrast in here. I always rinse off my aluminum pans because they can get holes in them over time from exposure to acid. Adding a little bit of some dish soap. Curious if we'll see, okay, I see a tiny bit of some blue in the water, but ooh, I love this like deep green and blue that we have in here. I don't know if to you they're looking that different from one another, but in person I see big differences. And it's just so fun! Oh man, I love a good green. And it's not often that I'll redo like a colorway so similar so soon, but I was so curious to see how this would come together. Like I really, really wanted to understand like if things would be different, and doing it as close together as possible is helpful. I mean, I suppose that in the original video I was using liquid dye stocks that I had about 1.2 grams of each color, and today I only used 1 gram of each color. So that was a difference that existed already. And another thing, I'm bringing all the like my analysis and conclusions in right now. Another thing we could do is have more yarn in the pan that would make it more crowded, and that would limit the ability of the yarn to access more areas. But using a hint of blue. All right, let's see. It's getting better. There's a hint of some color there. I'm not worried about it because it is so light. Caribbean blue can be a bleeder, and one thing I've found with this color is that you can go ahead and do an immersion dyeing round again, and in hot water some of the color will bleed because that's what happens with acid dyes. You can let that color bleed out, and then what you wash will have like a bit of an easier time, but already like it's pretty darn good. So I'm gonna pop this in my spin dryer, hang it all up to dry. But that's a reason why I don't usually leave yarn that's been dyed with Caribbean blue in the dye bath to soak up the last of the color. But anyway, we'll see the finished dry yarn soon. Can you tell the difference between the yarn that was dyed with a higher volume versus a lower volume of water? From far away, it's pretty easy to see the difference of the more blending we have here with our higher volume and the less blending we have over there with the lower volume. It looks like we got a lot of glaze from the blue, which shocks me. It blows my mind. So those differences are very subtle because we do have bits of yellow in here as well. It's just, you know, things are slightly more blended over here and we have slightly more contrast over there. Cindy, I really don't know which one is my favorite. Maybe I'll send you one of each. I'll reach out and see. But the differences that we're seeing here between these two very similar and yet different colorways are something that can be explained when you're using the same dye bath over and over to do the same colorway and you have some shifts in the volume. Little changes can make a difference on how the colors go on. Over time, the pH may change if you're not adding acid with your dyes, which we did do today. So we did not change the pH over time as we added more volume. But each time you add dye, you do change the volume. And so over time, depending on how much evaporation there is, things can make more of a difference. And if you think back to the 2024 Hanukkah Night 1, we saw a big difference in what I was doing, and the temperature probably played an effect there as well. Ultimately, when you're doing something like a space dyeing technique where you're adding the color and not moving it through, there is going to be some variability batch to batch. And while I don't think that I could call the two different sets here the quote same colorway, they are variations of the same colorway. And so I'm likely to include them in one listing, just lot A and lot B, so that way the differences between them are even more obvious. Because you would hate for someone to buy one skein of the more blended over on the right, get it, love it, and then go back to the shop and then buy a skein of the less blended on the left and not really know which one they purchased and then have them be less matching. And of course, within one batch, there's variation, even though it's one dye lot, because that is just what happens. But the hope is to have some amount of consistency and to make it as easy as possible for customers. Cindy, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope that you love the video and the way the yarn turned out. I think these colors are fire. Even though they're cool toned and green, they're very summer. But oh, can you imagine doing this just like this with a pink and yellow? That really could feel very flame-like, depending on, and maybe you'd also want to add some red in there. I don't know. I'm brainstorming. But anyway, Cindy, thank you so much. And if you want to learn how to become a lab partner like Cindy, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. And while you're there, you can pre-order yarn for the 2025 ChemKnits Hanukkah special. Over Hanukkah, which begins on December 14th this year, I will have a new yarn dyeing video every night that everyone can enjoy. But you can support the channel and also get some of the yarn I dye in each of those nights to open up. They'll be in wrapped packages with fun extras. It's a fun way to treat yourself and support the channel here at the same time. I'll have a link to that down in the video description. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.